Mr. President. Today I rise to give my fifth in a series of speeches addressing what I think will be a monumental achievement of this Senate and House when we pass our tax reform bill. I've spoken previously about how I believe tax reform will be good in a lot of different ways. First of all, talked about how this tax reform bill will spur economic growth in our country. Second, talked about how it will grow jobs in small businesses. Third, I talked about the benefits that working class families will have through policies such as a child tax credit. So today, I rise to talk about the importance of tax simplification. According to a publisher who analyzed the issue, since 1913, the federal tax code is 187 times longer than it was a century ago. On top of the tax code itself that spans thousands of pages, there are additional IRS regulations that are complicated, and you need somebody not just to figure them out for you and interpret them for you, but to figure out how that translates to your own tax return. Taxpayers have to comply, of course, with all of these. Beyond the code and the regulations, there are countless IRS procedures, technical memorandums, and more. And all of this adds to the length and complexity of our tax system. You can see it when you turn towards the April 15th date. The stress level in this country really rises, and a lot of it has to do with the complications of our tax system. The point is this: when it comes to figuring out your taxes, it's just far too complex. That's why businesses and individuals spend 6 billion hours a year complying with the tax code. That's more than 18 hours for every man, woman, and child in this country. That's the equivalent to 3 million people working full-time. 3 million people working full-time to comply with the tax code and fill out your tax forms. Or another way of looking at it, $195 billion in lost productivity. Again, our tax code is just too complicated. And that's also what tax reform is about: simplifying and making it easier for Americans to comply. According to the Brookings Institution, and I quote, "The notions that taxes should be simpler is one of the very few propositions in tax policy that generates almost universal agreement." But despite years of bipartisan talks, we are now on the verge of major tax reform for the first time in 30 years. Making our tax code simpler will benefit every single working family in this country. By roughly doubling the standard deduction, filing your taxes will be easier and more understandable. The higher standard deduction will let more middle-class Americans benefit from not just lower taxes, but also without the hassle of itemizing your tax return. Lower rates and fewer deductions will help all Americans spend less time and energy and worry on tax compliance. Our goal is for the overwhelming number of Americans to be able to submit their tax forms on a single sheet of paper without all those extra forms. And for many families in West Virginia and around the country who already use the standard deduction, increasing it will reduce their taxes. Now, 83% of West Virginians last year, or maybe it was the year before, the 2015-2016, 83% filed as simple form. So simplicity in our tax code and relief for middle-class families, those are the reasons why I offered a straightforward amendment to the Senate's budget resolution. My amendment said that Congress should focus on eliminating deductions that primarily benefit wealthier individuals in favor of tax policy that benefits the middle class. Let me say that again. Congress should focus on eliminating deductions that primarily benefit wealthier individuals in favor of tax policy that benefit the middle class. That means a tax code that is simpler, with fewer deductions and lower rates. It won't just be individuals and families who benefit from a less complicated tax code. Tax simplification will help our small businesses start, grow, and succeed. 95% of the businesses in my state of West Virginia are small businesses. and they employ over half of West Virginia's private sector workforce. So in addition to their high marginal tax rate, the complexity and compliance cost of their taxes impedes their economic growth, impedes their ability to grow their job, raise their wages, spur growth. A CNBC survey found that 22% of small business owners aren't sure what their effective tax rate really is. If Congress can simplify the code just to cut compliance costs in half, that would free up significant resources that could be used to grow the economy. Given that 50% of U.S. job growth has occurred in just 2% of our country's counties, we need that growth. Think about that. Over the last several years, 50% of the U.S. job growth has only occurred in 2% of our country's counties. We need the rest of the country to be able to enjoy that growth. To do that, we need to help the small businesses that are the major economic drivers in our economy. Simplifying the tax code will benefit so many across this country through GDP growth and higher wages. So I look forward to working with my colleagues to make tax reform and tax simplification a reality. Thank you, Mr. President, and I yield the floor.